Thank you everyone for joining today in this wonderful panel. It's a bit of an awkward situation set up here, me and my throne, but we're going to have as good of a conversation as possible. I'm joined today with Tejpaul Bhatia, Chief Revenue Officer of Axiom Space. And what better way to think about the future of economic development and to think about the future of economic development beyond this planet? So, Tejpaul, I'm going to start off with this question. Aerospace is seen as typically something that governments do, very massively expensive, capital-intensive projects. However, in recent years, we've seen the rise of the private sector start to move into space. Can you tell us a little bit more about Axiom, what you're doing, and your role in this next frontier?
Yeah, well, Phil, thank you very much for having me. I know it might feel a little awkward when you're wrong and on the other side. Like I'm saying, my angle is pretty comfortable. Nice to be here with everyone virtually. My name is Ted, Chief Revenue Officer of Axiom Space. And it's a very big question about this transition from something that has historically been a government endeavor, exclusively a government endeavor, to moving to the private sector and then on to venture capital. And there's several layers built into this. I think it's the first time that I've seen, and I've only been around for 44 years, but in human history, this kind of public-private partnership at this magnitude. And I joke about only being on the planet for 44 years, but as a student of history, I don't think I've seen anything like this. And I'll tell you a little bit about Axiom, my role, and how I see this transition playing out. Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station. We're a private venture-backed company. And when I say first commercial space station, all four of those words are very accurate and in order. So, private company building space infrastructure, picking modules that will dock onto the International Space Station in 2 years. Our first module will go dock onto the existing ISS. The second one will join it maybe 6 months later. These will be 2 habitats. The third is a lab. The fourth is Earth Observatory. And the fifth is a power station. Before that power station goes on, our segment of the ISS will receive power, cooling, life support from the ISS. But the entire strategy why Axiom even exists is to avoid a gap in human presence in low Earth orbit, particularly when the ISS is decommissioned or deorbited. So once our decommissioned and deorbited, sorry, let's hope it's not an or, the power tower will go on, and that allows us to at some point disconnect from the ISS. Our thrusters will push off at just the right angle, so the ISS deorbits, most of it will burn into the atmosphere, and then the rest fall into the Pacific Ocean. And then we're a freestanding commercial station. Prior to our first module going up in 2 years, and it's being built right now, it's being built in the north of Italy by a company called Thales Alenia in Turin. Before that module goes up, we have 4 what we call precursor missions. These are crewed missions to the ISS for us to practice training civilians and professional astronauts to go up to station, live and work up there, and for us to prepare for our module to come. And our first mission went up in April with the first ever all-civilian crew. And there was a Canadian gentleman, Mark Pathy from Montreal, who was on that trip as well. So that's Axiom in a nutshell. My job as Chief Revenue Officer is to figure out our revenue generation and our long-term monetization strategy. And to bring a perspective on why I was chosen for this role, I don't have an aerospace background. I've been thinking about it since I was 3 years old. I've been fascinated about it, but I joined Axiom from Google. And prior to Google, I was a startup founder, investor-backed startup founder for 10 years, 3 different companies. So my partnership with our CEO, who was a lifelong NASA leader, he was a program manager for the ISS program for the last 15 years of his career at NASA. Us coming together was really about bringing this expertise on putting a station up, but also figuring out venture business models, not too different from what we saw on the internet 20, 25 years ago, and applying it to this type of venture, this endeavor. And just jumping back to the question about, government to commercial, let's first talk about order of magnitude of how much money is going in. It's actually not that different from how much money went into building the infrastructure for the internet, which we all now think is free, right? Twitter is free, Google is free, Zoom is free, maybe it's freemium. But companies like Amazon and Google invested and continue to invest billions of dollars a year into fiber, data centers, hardware, software, operating systems, talent that has evolved in just the last 25 years to this level. So building that space infrastructure, I think, is very akin to the internet model. The difference is, though, the internet at some point realized that that investment in that infrastructure was necessary to run businesses like e-commerce and search and streaming, where space, having been a government endeavor and actually being subsidized by all of us, the taxpayers, it's very much been about the cost and the margins as opposed to the value that that investment in that infrastructure can create. So that's really where my primary focus in this role and in this company and in this industry is to shift us from a mindset of cost and not into a mindset of profit, but a mindset of value creation, particularly enterprise value creation for our venture investors.
I really like the parallel that you gave of how the internet at one point was seen as just a cost. And no one could have predicted at that moment the rise of the internet and all of the different revenue generating models, the products that would form from that. So maybe we'll fast forward to 2050, and Axiom is the international, a interspatial powerhouse of the industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about the economics of what do you see as being the revenue driving sources of the international space, or the first commercial space station in 2050? And also, can you speak a little bit about the communities and stakeholders around you that will be needed to engage and make that a reality?
Yeah, so I won't be foolish enough to make a prediction, 30 years from now. Although I feel like those fools who make those predictions and are right get paid off immensely. But the reason I won't say in 2050 is because short answer is I don't know. Nobody knows. And I'll use the internet as an example. That's 28 years ago, or 28 years from now, we look back 28 years at the internet. And it existed. There was some email, there were some people on it, dial-ups. Maybe someone could have predicted everyone in the world on it at some point. But I really doubt someone would have predicted, smartphones. I really doubted to the level that we have it out, predicted Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, Seamless, all these other things. And then furthermore, I even put this on, like the founders of Amazon and Google knows, would they have thought that cloud computing, what it's done in terms of value generation, creation of new entire markets, there was no way to predict that. So I can't even imagine what 2050 will look like from a business standpoint. But what I can tell you is, and a prediction I can make sooner, is us being a venture-backed company, we operate, or at least our investors expect return in a venture horizon, which is 7 to 10 years. Venture capitalists raise money from other investors, and they make very risky bets in the hopes that they get, outsized returns, knowing that majority of their bets will result in zero. So the few bets that make it have to, again, be the next Amazon or Google of the world. So I know for a fact that that's what we're aiming for. We have to be this $1 trillion market cap company by the end of the decade if we're going to be deemed as successful. Now, how we do that, I think, is very much about building this enabling platform, investing in infrastructure, fractionalizing it out, lowering the bar for access to this platform, whether that be microgravity or our space station, just like the internet did for many startups, and allow that ingenuity, that innovation to spread out to universities, individuals, just people who can get on a computer and write software, and it can be literally a world-changing application that they create. So where we are in this stage, in these first few years is building that platform and lowering the barrier for other people to be able to access this incredible opportunity that we have in orbit. And just to bring it back to the industry, not just about Axiom, I'm saying we have to be $1 trillion market cap. But in order for this industry to actually thrive, and we don't know because it's been a government endeavor all this time, the government is the primary customer, is there even a market out there? And in order for that to happen, there need to be multiple $1 trillion companies, and those $1 trillion companies need to be spawning other $1 trillion companies, $1 trillion market cap, I'm saying for now. So we have to do that by 2030 in order to be right, to be successful as a venture-backed company. Now, if we do that, I will make some predictions into what happens between now and 2050, but by 2030, I think you'll be seeing every country in the world, before 2030 actually, every country in the world having access to space, sustainable, permanent access to space. You will see every global corporation, at least the Fortune 100, Global 1000, again, before 2030, doing things in space that aren't just media and sponsorship promotion, and aren't just, and this is not to belittle anything, but aren't experiments, but are actual research and development that ends up in manufacturing of things that we can't even think of right now. And I also believe, maybe not by 2030, but in soon after, if those things are right, let's just say if Axiom is right, from the venture model, we've created this value, we've created this next Google, we're not going to be the only ones. There are going to be several others of them, and the demand will outgrow the supply. I mean, we'll need a lot more infrastructure in space, and I definitely see a world in the not too distant future where access for civilians to space is not limited to those who can afford it, but it'll literally be opportunities for entrepreneurs, scientists, enthusiasts, explorers to go up in a much more frequent fashion than we're seeing right now.
Tej, it strikes me that in order to have a space industry, you need to be able to get to space and you need to be able to work in space. And what Axiom is doing, what this commercial space station is doing, is providing the platform for people to work in space. And I find that extremely exciting. But it leads me to this question, which is, space isn't governed necessarily by anything yet. So how do you think about regulation? How do you think about responsible development? How do you think about what the rules and the laws and the regulations of the space industry as you're starting to develop it, a market that doesn't even exist?
Yeah, you know, it's a very difficult question. And there has been policy and law over the last several decades that has been out there, but like we've been discussing, it's been primarily and exclusively a government endeavor. So when we talk about going from government to commercial, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long transition and like public-private partnership like we have never seen in human history. But that transition from country to corporation just brings up a whole other dimension of complication here. Let's say we did the laws, the space laws that have been set up since the 60s. Let's say they do govern. And I'm not a policy person, so I don't want to be stating any opinions that might sound like fact. But let's just say whatever was written by people before us who were a lot smarter than us was great. That actually doesn't even fit with my personal politics. But let's just say these laws were great and it went forward. They're really designed for countries. What happens when a corporation gets up there and not even when a corporation, when the corporations get up there, they're governed by different rules. And they don't necessarily have to follow those rules, or maybe they do. And again, jumping back to the internet, is not too different from how we might have to deal with this. The other dimension that I think is very interesting, and we've taken some steps and done some experiments, particularly with our first mission. Another big shift that happens when we go from a government endeavor to a private endeavor is the involvement of the people. So the community, citizens. So while it's a government endeavor, that means let's use the space station. It's our station. It's mine, it's yours, it's the taxpayers. Now, some people will say it's representative, so is that really ours? I love space. It's mine. I'm very happy about it. But it is still, in some aspects, the will of the people. And when you go commercial, what happens to the will of the people? What happens to every person who might want to be involved? Now, you could say the market, right, the customers, but for the foreseeable future, I think those customers will be countries and corporations and high net worth individuals. But even in a world where they were doing manufacturing, they were doing all this stuff, the customers are still their corporations and countries. So maybe as shareholders, people can participate, or the community can be part of it. But I also see, and I don't want to get too far askew from this topic, but things that are happening with Web3, cryptocurrency, NFTs, also a big risky area when it comes to policy and regulation. But I see these trends converging at the same time, not because of each other, but interesting timing, where I see an opportunity to bring people into the fold, have them have a seat at the table. The example I'm speaking specifically of is we ran an NFT project on our first mission in AX1, and it was successful in the sense that it worked, that we created forward stores of value, and we have several people in our Web3 community that are engaging with us on a daily basis on what we're doing with the future for space. So yeah, I think, just sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent. I talked about several regulatory policy challenges, everything from cryptocurrency to the internet to space, but it will be a challenge that I think we'll see evolve. I feel optimistic about it. There's always a doom and gloom side of things, but I think what space brings is this hope and this diplomacy that we haven't seen on Earth yet, the way we've seen it in space.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an important thing to note, right, that whenever you're pushing a frontier in any industry, scope, sector, there's going to be unanswered questions. And the parallel that you give to Web3 is a good one, because it's still also a technology that has lots of potential, but potentially currently not necessarily the business plan or the business models that are mature yet. The fact that you've combined the two is very interesting. The next question I want to ask is back to sort of the partnership with the public sector, and a specific example. So Axiom recently signed an MOU with the Canadian Space Agency. And I'm personally really excited about that, but I'd love to hear more about what that MOU entails and how does that help your development journey?
Great question. So I'll start with the tail end. How does that help our development journey? It's funny, when you said it, I thought you were going to say, how does this help Canada's development journey? And I realized it's the same. And this gets back to the point of this public-private partnership. The MOU with Canada has a few parts to it. The first is it's all based on exploration. So exploration of human spaceflight opportunities, exploration of getting Canadian industry involved in the space economy, and exploration of creating programs that create permanent and sustainable access to space. Now I'll talk about all three of these. So human spaceflight opportunities, Canada is obviously a world leader when it comes to space, has a very long space legacy. I'm not surprised with the forward-thinking leadership that Canada has brought to the space economy. What I am surprised with is how fast we were able to get to this MOU. And it encourages me on how fast we're actually going to execute on the items in it. Human spaceflight, right now there's limited opportunities, whether you go through the ISS membership or even through the private opportunities like us, because it's limited by supply. But we have several missions coming up, and hopefully we'll see more Canadian astronauts on that. We had one in the first one, which is great. The second part of it is getting industry involvement in the space economy is something we're seeing actually all over the world. We had signed an MOU with Italy not too long before, and we're doing, as I mentioned, our stations being built in Italy, and there's a spaceflight opportunity for Italy as well. But this concept of bringing industry into the space economy, particularly non-space industry. So Canada has quite a bit of space industry as well. MDA, I believe, is in where you all are right now, and has been developing technology for space, but all the other industries within a country, within Canada, that could have a seat at the table, could have a say in what we do up there, what the research is, what the science is, what the manufacturing is, what the commercialization is. And the truth is, most of those companies aren't really thinking about it right now. If you look at the Fortune 100, the Global 1000, how many of them have a space strategy? I can count them on one hand, actually on 1,000. And it's for whatever reasons, but I think what now this MOU does, which was a third piece of the MOU, this exploration of finding sustainable, permanent access to space. So it's not just one-off, very expensive experiments, but people can conduct hypotheses, whether they be business hypotheses or science hypotheses that can result in real value generation. I think what this MOU does is sends a signal out to Canada, but also to the world, that the Canadian government, the Canadian people are very serious about this, that this is that inflection point. I was talking earlier, this decade, because of a 7 to 10 year venture horizon where the numbers add up very nicely for me. But it is true for us as a company, we have to do it. But for the governments, they've been doing this over the course of decades. Why all of a sudden this accelerated approach, just even to get an MOU on how quickly we got it done? And then even what people would say, what's the value of an MOU? It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't say anything, but I think it says a lot. It sends the signal that we're serious and the time is now. And again, Canada has always had that kind of leadership position in space. And I think with the coming of the end of life of ISS, many of these space legacy countries, it's not just about a gap, preventing a gap in human presence in lower Earth orbit. It is about preventing a slowdown of momentum of decades or centuries within our countries of very pioneering people and scientists and the will of the people getting us to this point. And we finally, in my opinion, with private backing, can move much quicker and make sure there isn't a slowdown of us going back to the moon or furthering exploration.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about it being a signpost of this is an inflection point. And, these MOUs are signals to the market that we should be taking this industry seriously, because it's what I think is different now from the decades past of government support and government intervention in space travel is that companies, the private sector, venture capital, investors are now putting backing behind it because they see the opportunity. And I think it's a confluence of all these other technologies, whether it's digital technologies, artificial intelligence, Web3, sustainability. My background is in sustainability, and we don't have enough of the critical minerals necessarily to feed all of the demand in the future for the sustainable technologies that we need. We're increasingly going to need to look to space. So I find it very interesting how bringing together all of these industries that aren't necessarily space industries is how you grow the space industry. And so that's the next question I have for you is, in your opinion, how do you think the industry will evolve from here in this sort of short to medium to long term?
Yeah, so I will break it down into the three customer segments as Chief Revenue Officer of Axiom that I look at. And the first is countries. And I think you're going to see three kind of developments, and if you look at the announcements we've made, they actually line up to this. You've got your space legacy countries. Canada is a great example. Italy is a great example. I was personally surprised when I got here. I don't have an aerospace background, but I assumed that those countries and the amount of contributions they make to the government side of space, that they would be the last that we work with. But the forward-thinking ones, we're seeing this opportunity and challenge. They are working with the private sector, particularly with Axiom. Then you have what I'll say fledgling space programs. They probably have satellites, they're doing some research, maybe they've sent an astronaut up at some point. Now all of a sudden they see their capabilities being augmented and scaled because of the private sector. So everything that Axiom has in terms of capabilities today on ISS, tomorrow on Axiom Segment, a few years from now on Axiom Station, can be the capabilities of every other country. So now you've got this opportunity for countries that have the will to have a space program and just assume there wasn't access to have access. Then you've got space ambitious countries. These are countries that don't have a space program. Maybe they have an office or one person in the education ministry or the science ministry who's looking at space and goes to a couple of conferences, but now all of a sudden they have a real opportunity, not just for insights, but for advisory and for access and to send research up. And people think I'm crazy about this when countries are working out their space strategies, but sending a human up is not out of the realm of possibility for anyone, really. And if Axiom's successful, it's going to be much more accessible soon. So that's how I see the countryside of our customer base evolving. The corporate side, and that is more of your standard outbound type of sales. Many of these countries are putting out RFPs. We know who the customers are. We know what conferences to go to. We have the relationship through our leadership. That's governments. On the corporate side, I keep saying the Fortune 100 or Global 1000. No one's looking for space. My opinion, but I'm pretty certain it's true. No boardroom is sitting around and say, oh, we have this problem. How can space solve that problem? And I think it's two reasons. One is education and awareness. But second is real evidence on return on investment. At this level of cost, the Fortune 100, the Global 1000, particularly public companies that have to answer to shareholders, they're not going to be able to even spend the kind of money you need to spend to get up to space and do something meaningful without having to justify it. And right now, also in my opinion, but all the use cases I've seen out there come from a scientific world, which is great. But when they talk about this future opportunity of manufacturing and all this, it doesn't have the return on investment, the revenue hard numbers that a CEO and CFO would have to show their board to justify it. So everything will be within this discretionary budget. But I think that's okay if you go and talk to all these folks and say, hey, look, let's get started. What are your objectives? What can space do for you? Well, you know what? For a smaller amount than you think, you can go and get, dip your toe and start building towards a much longer space strategy. I see that evolving. And at Axiom, we've worked with Amazon. We sent up a computer on AX1. We recently announced a partnership we did with GH Mum, the champagne company, part of the Pernod Ricard family. It's a long-term relationship with them. We worked with Omega on AX1, several other non-traditional, non-space companies. And you're going to see a lot more of that going forward. And on the third segment, private individuals, right now it is very expensive to go to space, and only a handful of people can afford it. And there are some narratives out there that are less than positive for these folks, but it's not just their money, it's their time, it's their families, it's their foundations, it's their communities. Like Mark in Montreal is a perfect example. He did a bunch of work with McGill University, Montreal Children's Hospital, real hard science up there that, these people are pioneers, not even the right word. They're explorers. They're setting the stage for this. Now, I believe that the cost will go down. I don't think it'll go down because of launch costs going down or economic factors like people might write about. I think it's because companies like Axiom are going to figure out transformational and exponential business models that will create so much value, enterprise value, so that when each mission goes up, it's not about who can afford to go up with that rocket, but who we think should go up.
I appreciate that breakdown of the three sort of customer segments. And it's interesting too, because they each have their own unique channel of development, their unique timelines, different horizons where these customer segments will start to come online. And I appreciate too the work that has to be done in terms of education and also engagement with particularly corporate customers. You said and mentioned how no one is really thinking about space right now, but eventually they will be. So what a competitive advantage it may be if they start thinking about it now. So I think I have time for one more question. And this question is, we're in a room right now with a lot of decision makers, a lot of folks who represent potentially corporate customers. If you were to leave them with one message about the space industry, about Axiom, what would it be? What message of hope would you give?
Sure. So it's not a message of hope, it's a question. And it's a call to action. And it's not for everybody. It's a very simple personal question. This isn't about your companies. This isn't about the future. It isn't about even hope. I think it's something much simpler and perhaps even much deeper. And I don't know who's in the room. I don't know what your audience is right there, but I end many of my talks with this, and I end every conversation that I have with this. Would you go to space? And if your answer was yes, I didn't ask anyone to raise their hands because I couldn't see, but if your answer was yes, or your hand went up before your heart skipped to the next beat, then you've known since maybe before you were born that for some reason there's this calling for you to go up there. I've known it, I recognized it when I was 3. When I ask this question, I think it's about a third of people that the yes is right away, without even thinking. Then maybe people jump to, oh, it's expensive, it's dangerous, I have a family, I have work, all this stuff. But the initial instinct, if your answer is yes without even thinking, then you're wired a certain way. It's not good or bad, it's just who you are. I've seen the equivalent when I ask, when people say no, they're just as quick to say no. And they take it a step further. They take it to, well, that money could be spent down here. What about the environment? What about, and they jump to all this other stuff to argue why it's bad. And then there's people in the middle who's I never thought about it. So I know this was a message of hope for everyone, but I'll tell you what I'm doing is I'm segmenting the audience and asking you to call me. Anyone can call me. I'm at Tejpaul, Tejpaul on Twitter. You can reach me anyway. Anybody can call me, but specifically those people whose hands went up, I would like you to call me. And the reason is, a year and a half ago, I didn't know a tenth of what we're doing was possible. And I'm a space nut. I actually invested in Axiom 3 years ago. And in the last 15 months of my job, the conversations I've had, I can guarantee you, every conversation I have is the first time in human history that conversation has had. I was in Montreal our last month at the Montreal Symphony Gala. And we also had meetings with CSA. We announced the MOU in Paris. But that night, every conversation walking around between a representative of the government, an executive of a company, myself and an astronaut, it sounds like the beginning of a joke, but why would those 4 people be in a room together and start talking about ideas that are very possible, but really wouldn't have been possible for now? So the moment of hope is when I asked you, would you go to space? If your answer is yes, mine is we can get there. And I'm not talking about selling you a seat. If you can afford it and you want to go, of course, we'll take you. But we have an opportunity that will change humanity forever in a very good way. And I'm going to jump back to something you said before, which was, in order for this to succeed, not only do we have to get there, we have to work there. I would add to that is not only do we have to get there and work there, but we have to survive there. And what we're doing at Axiom is taking it a step further, is we have to learn how to live there. And living is not just surviving. Living is not just working. Living is not just getting to the place that we're exploring or settling. Living is all of our traditions, all of our culture. And when humanity expands, as I believe it should, it will come back to those people who raise their hands right now and knew no matter what that one day they want to go there.
That's amazing. Well, I hope you save me a seat. I will meet you in space. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Sorry I couldn't be there in person.